Tonight, the topic, as David said, is on Trumpism in the United States, what it is, where it comes from, and how to counter it, so how to resist it. So I think if we're all here tonight in some way or another, it's because we've all been asking ourselves the same question or a similar question. What the fuck is going on in the United States? Every day we wake up, it seems worse than 2016 to 2020, to a new announcement, a new declaration that just seems like it was unimaginable just a few years ago. So who is Trump? I'm sure most of you know, but I'm still going to start by that. I would describe him as a gaudy, tacky, lying, cheating, pussy-grabbing, racist, scandal-plagued real estate mogul who turned reality TV star, who loves golfing, eating fast food, and ranting on social media. I think that's one way of describing him. He was president from 2016 to 2020 under the slogan "Make America Great Again." So we'll come back to that a little later. He was twice impeached during that time, so he was found by Congress to be guilty of a few crimes. He orchestrated in part the attack on the Capitol on January 6th, when Congress was meeting to validate the 2020 election. And now he's been reelected in 2024 as the Project 2025 president. What's interesting is that his electoral college vote, so in the United States, the president is elected by the electoral college, so the number of senators and representatives in Congress, and it's divided by each state. So Trump did win an overwhelming majority, 312 votes to 226 for Kamala Harris, who is the Democratic candidate. But in popular vote terms, he only won 49.8% of the vote, and Harris won 48.3% of the vote. So that gives us already a little indication about the polarization that exists in the United States when we look at the popular vote between right people who support Trump and then people who don't support Trump. So I think since he took office, what we could say is that Trump and his administration have been undertaking a real strategy, a shock strategy, shock and awe strategy. And I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with the term, but it was coined by Naomi Klein, a Canadian journalist and activist. And essentially, the shock strategy aims to purposefully create or take advantage of a crisis or crises in which citizens have been disoriented. So it could be economic, political, it could be a natural disaster, et cetera. And their capacity to resist the implementation of extreme economic, social, and political policies that aim to fundamentally change society is very diminished. So we could say that in the past, however many days Trump's been in office, I think 60 or so, he's basically been doing that. So he's created a Department of Government Efficiency with Elon Musk at the head. I think everyone knows Elon Musk. He ignores court decisions and proposed getting rid of judges who disagree with his policies. He's ordered authorities to disappear immigrants off of the streets. He has abolished the Department of Education. He has outlawed diversity and inclusion initiatives, diversity and equality initiatives, both within the government and in the private sector. He's deported thousands of immigrants, denied immigrants entry into the country, regardless of their legal status, laid off tens of thousands of federal employees, while proposing to strip them of their labor rights, and just a general disrespect and disregard for the norms of what we could consider liberal representative democracy. And the last point would be foreign policy, which I'm sure you've followed with the shift away from traditional allies such as NATO and Europe toward Russia, and also the tariff war that he's looking to put in place. So that's just a quick summary of what he's been doing since he came back into office. I had a much longer list, but it wouldn't fit on the PowerPoint. But the New York Times has a good day-by-day take on everything he's been doing, if that interests you. So what are the predominant explanations that exist for Trumpism? I've picked four. There's more, but I've tried to pick the four main ones. So Trumpism has been analyzed as the return of 1930s fascism. That's one narrative that exists. Another narrative that exists is the deplorables narrative. So the idea that Trumpism is the political expression of people who are sexist, racist, homophobic, and rich, and whose opinions cannot be changed. A third explanation that's been put forward is the crisis of the homogeny of the US capitalist class. So essentially, following the 2008 Great Recession, attempts were made to counter neoliberal political and economic policies. And also the US capitalist class faced a growing problem in accumulating capital. And so the idea of this explanation is that it's the attempt by the capitalist class to restore their authority and to restore more favorable conditions of capitalist accumulation. And the fourth main narrative is the neoliberal or cosmopolitan neoliberalism narrative, according to which Trumpism is a reaction by segments of the population, especially in the industrial white working class, whose jobs, communities, and opportunities of social mobility have been devastated by decades of policies promoting neoliberalism and multiculturalism. Today, the idea is not to defend one of these explanations. Each one might have a little bit of truth to it, but I think we have to look at the specificity of Trumpism today in 2025 and see exactly what makes it work, what makes it tick, what logics underlie it, where did it come from, and see what we can do about it. So just to give a perspective of where I come from in my analysis, in 2016 I did a very similar talk for a small group in Paris called Trump, Whither the United States, Where's the United States Going? And in that I essentially analyzed Trumpism through economic lenses. So I mostly said that it was the reaction by the more radical segments of the capitalist class looking to restore capitalist accumulation and their authority and put an end to kind of the chaos of the 2010s. Today, that's no longer my stance. And so the analysis that I'm going to propose today is more nuanced, I believe, and reflects my own personal journey from Trotskyism to post-Marxism through Gramsci. So I'm not going to get into those debates, but it's just to give you an idea of where I'm speaking from. So the first point I'd like to talk about is what makes Trumpism 2.0 tick. So what makes it work? What are the logics that are behind it? What are the fundamental ideas behind it? So one of the first ones is authoritarianism, obviously. And I believe that this comes from the post-political consensus that took place in the Western world in the 1990s, which essentially says that for every political problem, there's a technocratic solution. Essentially, the political was progressively sidelined in an attempt to make policies that were conceived by experts, etc. And as these policies were rejected by growing segments of the population, the repressive functions of the state, so the police, the military, things like banning protests, etc., had to become more prominent. So for me, the first logic of Trumpism today is this idea that a strong repressive state where politics doesn't really have that much, and political deliberation doesn't have that much to play. A second logic would be techno-libertarianism, so which would be best represented by Elon Musk today. So this is a logic that evolved out of the 1990s in Silicon Valley. Essentially, people who promote technological solutions to issues, technocratic solutions to issues also, and have, defend essentially individual freedom at any cost. So this would kind of be like the Elon Musk wing of Trumpism. The third logic of Trumpism, I would say, is the valorization of markets, so the free market, the defense of traditional morality, even though he's not a very moral person if we, look at him from that perspective, and especially the defense of social hierarchies in the name of individual freedom. So we see that with his attacks on the right to abortion. We see that in his attacks on the rights of trans people and gender-affirming care. And we see that especially in how he treats, or how he asks his administration to treat immigrants. The fourth logic of Trumpism for me would be the demonization of democratic political power and the social provision functions of the state. So anything that has to do with, even Congress making laws, or the state, the federal government giving health care benefits to people, or unemployment. There's a demonization of that within his discourse that's very strong. And the last, and perhaps one of the main ones, is patriotism and nativism. So that's that was basically his one of the main logics in 2016 to 2020 with Make America Great Again. So this idea of protecting America, protecting its interests on the global scene, and restoring its place in the global order. And definitely compared to now, it's these more post-political authoritarian logics, the techno-libertarian ones, and I think the demonization of democratic political power that are the most forceful. A lot of people in his first term thought or analyzed his first term as a way of restoring an economic patriotism among the people. I think that's taken a backseat in this new form of Trumpism we're seeing, and I'll try to come back to and explain why I think that's the case. So another interesting part about Trumpism is looking at how he constructs the political boundaries, how he polarizes the political space. So he's very, very effective in creating two camps, the we and the them, the MAGA and the anti-MAGA. And I think that's one of the very strong points of his political project, that the left has not totally seized. I don't think that they've been fully aware of how strong his political project is at doing this. So obviously in the we, which is the Trump team, the MAGA, we have frustrated white middle and working class individuals from cities, suburban and rural communities, Catholics, Christian evangelicals, racists, sexists, homophobes, the rich, business owners, and Trump supporters, obviously. And in the them, We have racial and ethnic minorities, the gender and sexual minorities, trade unionists, so-called wokeists, leftists, the cultural and academic elite, journalists, civil servants, judges, the deep state, and Democrats. So Trumpism is very, very good at dividing society into these two camps, and then mobilizing the we camp, especially during elections. And the third point I'd like to make about Trumpism and what makes it work, and I'll come back to this also in my critique of the left strategy today, is that it has an emotional dimension that's very, very powerful. It feeds off of the feelings of revenge, resentment, nihilism that were bred by decades of neoliberal policies, and the feeling that the people have no voice in what's going on. And also, he's very good at channeling a desire for nostalgia, a nostalgic desire for the way things were. So essentially, when racial minorities and sexual minorities and gender minorities knew their place in society, and white male Christian, the white male Christian figure was predominant. So I think these three points, the political logics that he uses, the way he divides the political and social space between a we and a them, and then holds that all together through emotional dimensions, are very important and are the three pillars of Trumpism 2.0 today. So where does Trumpism 2.0 come from? Obviously, I could have gone back to, the beginning of the history of the United States, but that's not possible, and it'd be probably very boring. So I tried to pick the four more recent themes that I think are the most important in the formation of Trumpism 2.0. So obviously, Trumpism is kind of a neoliberalism's Frankenstein. So neoliberalism that wanted to economize everything, turn people into commodities, restrict the sphere where democratic political power was exercised, essentially to, voting during regularly scheduled elections. The idea also that, we would discipline individuals through the defense of traditional morality, social hierarchies, and the private sphere. So the retreat of the state in favor of the family, for example. And also the idea of, to do all that, you had to destroy the notion of, the social and the collective and the public, to favorize individualism and the family. So essentially, that's one of the strands of Trumpism for me. From neoliberalism, Trump does not represent, I don't think, a direct line through neoliberalism, but it's a product of neoliberalism that was not intended by the people who theorized about neoliberalism. The second strand that I identify is, and I think this is a big marker between Trumpism 1.0 and Trumpism 2.0, of the COVID pandemic and the growing economic insecurity, and also the growing ecological disasters and insecurity that we find today. So during the COVID-19 pandemic, in sense, I think a lot of demands that are being made by segments of the population involve demands for protection, greater security, greater means for self-preservation. So this could take the form, in some cases, of better security measures for workers, or better protections for house owners and renters. But it could also take the form of protection from vaccines, or the academic elite that wants to indoctrinate our students and our youth. So it's this idea that the pandemic and then the ecological disasters that are multiplying have really put these demands for protection, security, and self-preservation onto the map. And another thing that came out of the pandemic, especially, was this logic of technological solutionism. So this idea promoted in Silicon Valley by people like Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk, that for every problem, there's a technological solution. And this comes from the technocratic post-political consensus that I talked about. But it's this idea that we don't really need politics. We just need someone who knows what they're doing, and with a lot of technology, and we can solve the problem. The third important part, I think about from where Trumpism, where Trumpism comes from, is Barack Obama's presidency. And this is extremely important because I think it's a true turning point in contemporary politics in the US. So Barack Obama, obviously the first Black president elected in 2008. That did not make a lot of people happy, especially on the right. And one of his first acts as president was to try to reform healthcare in the United States. And it was a big debate. He didn't have the majorities in Congress to push through a universal healthcare system. So the deal that they negotiated was what we call the Affordable Care Act, which essentially kept private insurances in place, but created markets where people could buy private insurance at a reduced rate. And this was, so we have the election of the first Black president. We have one of the first attempts since the 1960s to expand the social powers of the state. And that led to the Tea Party revolt. So I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with the Tea Party, but the Tea Party was a fraction within the Republican Party, a fraction of especially elected people in Congress, who started to criticize the Affordable Care Act, that wanted more austerity politics. They wanted to cut social programs. It was very oriented towards the fiscal economic side of things at the time, but it was definitely a reaction to this election of the first Black president who wanted to expand the social state and the social functions of the state for the first time in a few decades. So definitely Trumpism has some of its roots in the Tea Party revolt, because it's from the Tea Party revolt where the divide within the Republican Party became bigger and bigger and bigger, and that's where Trump managed to take his chance and get nominated on getting support from this radical right fringe of the Republican Party. And I would say that the fourth strand that defines the emergence of Trumpism would be a reaction to the social movements of the 2010s. So I'm sure you all followed Occupy Wall Street, Black Lives Matters, the Me Too movement, the Fight for 15. So these were all social movements that took place from 2008 to more or less up until the pandemic broke out. It was mass protests, occupations of public spaces, sometimes fighting with against the police, denouncing powerful men in certain industries who would take advantage of women. Fight for 15 was the fight for a better minimum wage, which was put in place by a young group of trade unionists across the country, especially for workers in the fast food industry. So all of these movements were demanding more liberty, more equality, more solidarity, more democracy. Uh, and this led to a rise of democratic socialism in the United States. So we could see this through how many members Democratic Socialists of America, so the main socialist organization today in the United States, gained. They went from about 5,000 members to almost 100,000. Not everyone was active, but 100,000 almost dues-paying members. So in the United States, that's enormous. When I was in DSA, we weren't even 1,000 people back in 2008. So across the whole country. So it's really this explosion of democratic socialism with the election of people like AOC and other representatives in Congress who are called the Squad. So mostly women of color, millennials, who adhere to the principles and the ideas of democratic socialism, but who work within the Democratic Party. So officially they're elected as Democrats, but they primaried Democratic people who were already in office on the Democratic Socialist program. So Trumpism essentially comes, if we just look at the recent times, I think from this neoliberalism, the deformed neoliberalism, the effects that weren't intended that came out of it, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the economic insecurity and the social insecurity that created. Barack Obama's presidency, which reactivated strains of racism that are very deep in the American political imagination. And then this reaction to social movements and the demands for more liberty, equality, solidarity, and democracy that really kind of, put some chaos onto the political scene because people weren't used to seeing mass protests against the police or seeing students in the parks in New York occupying and demanding more rights for the 99% against the 1%. So if we just look at this in the past 15 years, these would be the main themes that I would put forward for explaining where Trumpism comes from. So now I'd like to look at the different ways the different sectors of the left in the United States have been responding to Trumpism. And I'm going to start with the Democratic Party. And I know that might be, most people would say the Democratic Party is not the left. It's not a real left party. I would agree with that mostly, but since there are leftist, socialists, democratic socialists in it, I thought it was interesting to see how they're reacting to it. So one of the first strategies is the strategy of appeasement, which is, exemplified by someone like Governor Gretchen Whitmer from Michigan, which is basically the idea that we make concessions because Trump won the election and some of his proposals are popular among voters. So when opinion polls tend to say that voters support a measure that Trump is proposing, they just say, okay, we're going to make a concession and go along with it. Perhaps the most controversial strategy is the roll over and play dead one, which was formulated recently by James Carville, who's a Democratic strategist. And honestly, I'm not sure how he still is a Democratic strategist because it's just absurd what he's proposing. But he basically says to do nothing. We don't have to do anything. It's a tactical pause, a strategic political retreat. They talk in these terms, these military terms. And he's quoted as saying, essentially, we should allow the Republicans to crumble beneath their own weight and make the American people miss us. So his idea is essentially, if we don't do anything, Trump will just go crazy, people will get sick of him, he'll get thrown out of office, and Democrats will come back to power without having to do any soul searching about why they lost in 2025. A third approach is the judicial approach, which I won't talk long about, but in the United States, it is a very judicial society. People can bring lawsuits very easily. So the idea is to attack the Trump administration through lawsuits. So we just sue the administration. Every time there's a measure, every time there's something that happens, we bring a lawsuit, and we're going to stop the administration from putting that measure in place. Sometimes it's successful, sometimes it's not. And I think it has been working to a certain degree, because the fact that Trump had to come out and say, I want to impeach any judge that goes against me, means that the judicial branch of the government was a little thorn in his foot. So the judicial approach is more individual citizens or attorney generals, people at the state level who are bringing these lawsuits. And then within the Democratic Party, there's a last strategy, so a strategy of institutional resistance. And I'm not sure if you saw, but just the other day, Senator Cory Booker, and I think I put Massachusetts, but I think he's from New Jersey. He just spoke on the Senate floor for 25 hours or so, continuously, against Trump. And so the idea is to wage a political offensive in the halls of Congress and in the media, but still staying within that institutional framework. So using the powers of Congress to control Trump, using the powers of the Senate to resist the measures, et cetera. So for now, the Democratic Party is torn between those who want to roll over and play dead or appease Trump. I'd say that'd be one camp. And we've seen that with a lot of the representatives or senators, who have been voting for his cabinet nominees. So they criticize all his policies on foreign policy, but then they go and vote for his Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. And then we have those who want to wage this political offensive within Congress, and get the Democratic Party a little bit back on track with electors. So that was for the Democratic Party. Now I'd like to turn more to what we could consider the left, maybe in a more traditional sense, so radical left. I chose two examples because there's a lot of things going on. But these are the examples I know the best. So example one is of democratic socialists, and Democratic Socialists of America, and the people who identify with that organization, and the Fight Oligarchy campaign. So I'm not sure if you've seen, but there's a major rally campaign with Bernie Sanders and AOC going across the country with mass rallies, especially in swing states, so states that can be Democratic or Republican depending on the year, and also in districts that are swing districts, so districts where the election is very close between Democrats and Republicans. So they've been going across the country and stumping at these mass rallies that have been bringing out thousands and thousands of people. So it's actually quite positive, I think. And with this strategy of mass rallies, so getting people energized, they have a few other tactics, so petitions, using petitions on particular questions and themes. Also bombarding elected officials with telephone calls and emails and letters to say that we're against what's happening. And then also electoral pressure, so talking about having candidates in these districts that challenge either a Democrat that supports Trump or a Republican that supports Trump. around this idea that essentially the United States has become officially an oligarchy. So the idea is to take aim at Musk, Elon Musk, because he's such a decisive figure within the Trump camp, in order to defend essential social programs like Social Security, which is the retirement program for elderly people, Medicare, which is healthcare, public healthcare for people over 65, Medicaid, which is for low-income people, Veterans Affairs, obviously, national parks, etc. All these education. So to say essentially that Musk has to go and we need to protect these essential programs. So tomorrow, actually, interestingly enough, there's a nationwide campaign organized called Hands Off. So it's organized by a coalition of progressives in which democratic socialists are taking part. And essentially their call to action, and what I put here, is Trump, Musk, and their billionaire cronies are orchestrating an all-out assault on our government, our economy, and our basic rights. We're taking to the streets nationwide in nonviolent protests with a clear message, hands off. So it's this idea that people need to get organized and actually need to. I'll see if he comes back.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. It's fine. It's fine. Okay, it's back. So hands off. So fight oligarchy. Hands off. So essentially drawing parallels between today and the 1920s or the 1890s, which were decades when billionaires and millionaires, the rich, were essentially attempting to put their hands on government and reduce it as much as possible in the social provision field. A second example that we have is Left Voice. So Left Voice is an independent online journal published by a Trotskyist group in the United States. And they're representative of the second, I would say the second main strategy within the left, which is to campaign for the creation of an independent, what they call an independent revolutionary socialist workers' party. So it's a totally different approach. For them, there's no working with the Democratic Party. There's no working within the institutions of the state. If they do happen to be elected at some point, the idea would just to be a voice of the revolutionary socialist workers movement. And their idea is more to be involved within the unions in the United States, to develop a revolutionary wing within the union movement, which would then lead to a revolutionary party of workers. So these are the two main strategies within the left. Obviously, there's other ones, people who are more centered on, solidarity campaigns at the local level, mutual aid, organizing on different questions like immigration, the rights of trans people, etc. But if we're talking more about the political left at the national level, I would say these are the two main strategies that are competing. So in my view, there's a few limits to the resistance that's started to take place so far. One of the first limits isn't necessarily political, but more a question of mass. In 2016, 17, 18, 19, in 2020, the resistance was much more quick to become public and was much more massive. I don't know if you remember when people occupied airports, for example, to protest against the Muslim ban, so the ban that prevented people from Muslim majority countries to come to the United States. There was a kind of a mass effect where you saw these spectacular events happening, and you could see the resistance. Right now, the resistance seems to be a little less massive, a little less public, a little less immediate, but I think at the individual level, if you kind of do a tour on social media, you do see people who supported Hillary Clinton in 2016 who are now calling for, black blocs in New York City, right? And their suburban white moms. So it's a total shift in how people are thinking that I think is taking time to put in place. But there's definitely this feeling that something urgent it needs to happen. I think just people don't really know what needs to happen or how to do it. If I'm talking about the left more particularly, I would say that one of the limits that the left strategy has so far is what I would call an essentialist, an economicist, and a rationalist approach to politics. So I'll try to explain that very quickly. Basically, my critique is that in many cases, the left continues to believe in some way or another that the economic base of the society determines the political phenomenon that take place, and that social subjects, classes essentially, are fully constituted identities with political interests that we can identify. This is really a short summary of these different points. There's more nuance to it, but and the strategies that rest upon these assumptions appeal to those identities, so the working class, and the historical interests and the class struggle, and the need to fight what they call false consciousness, so the misrecognition of one's real interests, to bring about socialism. On the other hand, we could have an approach that's more anti-essentialist and anti-foundationalist, so which would be basically that all systems of social and political relations are political constructions. And so the task of the left is to construct a subject. So to construct a subject against Trumpism by putting together the different demands that I talked about. So the demands for greater protection. So for self-preservation, for greater, equality in the domain of racial relations, gender relations, sexual relations, etc. So the idea is to construct the subject and its interests by knitting together those different things with different ideas, different practices, and especially emotions. And that's one of my biggest critiques to the left today in the United States, is that they don't take into account the power of emotions and affects when they're developing their strategy. And I think this is something we can learn from Trumpism, and it's what I talked about earlier, that Trumpism is extremely effective at mobilizing revenge and the feelings of hopelessness into a racist, homophobic project. And the left needs to take into account that these feelings exist, and without dismissing them, they need to try to propose something that's more articulated to hope and optimism and greater equality and greater democracy. So just to conclude, because I think I've taken up enough time, and I won't have time to go into the detail, but something that I had been thinking about through my readings was what could a left hegemonic project against Trumpism look like? And it seemed to me that something that came out of what I was reading would be something along the lines of a green democratic New Deal, Why? Just quickly, New Deal, because the New Deal reminds us in the United States of the programs of the 1930s and 1940s and 1960s for economic and social security and protection. The green, obviously, to take into account the ecological crisis that threatens the existence of society, and that responds to the desire for self-preservation. And then the democratic, obviously, to talk to those demands for greater liberty, equality, democracy, and the multiplication of social and political spaces where democratic rights are sovereign. So something that could be done is build off of the Fight Oligarchy campaign through Sanders and AOC and what they're doing, but pushing it a little bit further, I think, and they'll need time to do that, obviously, but to unite these different, people with their different demands into what could be called a people, or, it could take any name, really, with a common aim and a common enemy. And then mobilize these emotions of vulnerability, revenge, but put them into a positive perspective around hope, empowerment, social justice, unlike Trump, who basically articulates it around nihilism and fatalism and, revenge. So that was just a little conclusion. And so I can take questions. I don't know how much time we have. 5 minutes?
Hi, my name is Natalie. I am the Party in Luxembourg. Thank you so much, Sean, for your expose. And I wanted to ask, I don't know how long you are in Luxembourg now. What would you recommend us?
It's a big question.
Yeah, I know, but to have some ideas. What we as the Lénk could do, because I am with you when you say that we should pay attention to emotions and effects.
Okay, thank you.
And that you can, Paul? Oui, je sais. Oui, il y a deux pôles.
My name is Paul Tenner, I'm a member of the Lénk. I thank you for your very long and interesting description of this crazy character, Donald Trump, which does not only bother the US, but the whole world. But I have one question, a simple and stupid question. How is it possible that the American population has voted twice for an asshole like him? I mean, okay, the logic would say that there is not much intelligence, or okay, he has, and that's why I understand also why Trump wants to cut down the Department of Education. Because when people are educated, then they start to think a bit better. So that's why he's very keen on doing that. That's what we had here also in medieval times, when the elites or the church decided who can study and who cannot study.
Okay,
Thank you.
And then we take also Mark Buchstaben.
Yes, I'm Mark. I have a dual question. Once, when you look at how fast Trump, when he got to power again now, has been exploiting the system with ICE and Homeland Security and everything, and this part is not really a question, it's something that's happening, which reminds me of what happened in occupied countries during World War II. That is when functionaries voluntarily denounce people and join the system. The other thing is the role of conspiracy theories and how to fight it, because we see the same kind of people who are supporting Trump in the US seem to be supporting similar parties like AfD in Germany or the RN and everything.
Okay. Thank you for your questions. I think I'll start with the second one, then the third, then I'll do the first one. So why did Americans vote twice to elect Trump? I think one part is, yeah, that there's been a growing segment of the population that doesn't have access to education. But also, more importantly, I think it's these feelings of revenge and I have friends, people I know from high school, etc., who on Facebook wrote when Trump was elected, and proudly they wrote, it's the revenge of the white heterosexual male. So this idea that revenge is very powerful, it's a very powerful feeling, it's a political motor. And Trump, he's very, very good at mobilizing that because his whole political philosophy revolves around that, even his business philosophy. I do believe that this question of what to do with the emotion of revenge that exists because, what people are feeling in their communities isn't necessarily false. Neoliberalism destroyed communities, it destroyed social services, it destroyed individuals. And so the idea is we need to take revenge. It could be against ethnic minorities and gender minorities and women and people who aren't Christian, or it could be against the oligarchy. Essentially, that's my analysis, and it depends on how we articulate those feelings with the demands that exist, because there are democratic demands in U.S. society that exist. So it's how do we articulate that and mobilize it into a project that people can identify with. So I think that would be my response to that question. The question about conspiracy theories is very interesting. And I'm not an expert on conspiracy theories, but I do think that social media has played an extremely important role in the ability of people to perpetrate these theories, wild theories, through podcasts, through Facebook, through Twitter, through Instagram, TikTok, and they've gotten a following. And there is an anecdote that I do know about that's interesting. I think can tell us a little bit about conspiracy theories in the United States. So there's a conspiracy theory that Hillary Clinton was a lizard from outer space. And actually, someone studied this subject and found that people were writing letters to the editor in local newspapers about politicians who were supposedly lizards from outer space. And so it's actually something that has existed in the United States for at least 75 years to 100 years, and it just transfers from one politician to another. So I think beforehand it was just seen as some nutty person writing to the editor. Well, now it's someone who could have potentially 1 million followers or more. So I think the role of social media is important, and I do think that a lot of the left hasn't realized that yet. I think having figures on TikTok, having figures on Twitter, having people, basically influencers, but political ones, occupying that space is extremely important. And unfortunately, the right wing is very effective at it, and the left wing hasn't caught up yet. That's my personal opinion. Even though there's attempts, but I think it's something that we could all work on. As for what we could do in Luxembourg, I think that's a big question that maybe we'll discuss more at the end of April. But in general, I do think that there's maybe two questions to have a discussion about. This question about the emotional, affective, phantasmatic dimension of politics, and kind of getting out of the rationalist perspective that if we just appeal to people's rational material interests, they'll vote for us or they'll support us. And I think that's not totally true. So this discussion around emotions, affects, and then also the discussion about the place of, is it is it possible to mobilize people around terms such as class and socialism today? Or do we have to redefine socialism as part of a larger project of radical democracy, where socialism would be, one of the aims, but not the final aim. So expanding democracy. And also the idea that we don't necessarily have to come to the table with a program that's, 100 points. What's important is that we go into the communities, the different groups, and we see what are the demands that are being made and how we can draw them together around something that unifies them, even when we don't necessarily share the same ideological views or the same strategic views, but something we can all identify with. So I don't know if that's very clear. It's kind of broad, but that's what I would say.
Hi, you sort of answered already most of my questions. A long time ago, there was a stolen election, Bush score, or what they called a stolen election, and one of the analyses was that why do people who, well, sort of elect people against their own interests? Because, Republicans are not defending the interests of poor people, for instance. And the simple answer is because they have simple concepts that people can understand and they don't have to change anything about their own lives. And I think most of this is true today also. So do you think that's part of also the problem of the left, that maybe the concepts are too nuanced? But then again, if you give up on the nuances of the complexity of issues, how do you then stay true to the purpose of what the left is trying to defend?
You talked about the inefficiency of the left resistance movement. I was wondering how you were factoring in censorship, because as far as I've seen, it's become much stronger. Also in social media, mainly also because people supporting Trump have the power to suppress content, and people that as a consequence aren't able to rally, don't get the information to rally, to become active. So I was wondering, because I don't think it wasn't a problem, maybe I'm wrong, but yeah, I was wondering how you factored that in.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. I have one of those US and American questions, maybe a blind spot for other Luxembourgish people or Europeans. It's about the central project that we see outside of America as we perceive Trump, which is his slogan, "Make America Great Again." So my question is, unironically, what the fuck is he talking about? Because I don't think any American alive today has lived through even a minute or a week of this golden age that he's describing. So my question is maybe very easy. Was there any time in American history that he could refer to actually as a real time where things worked out as he describes it? And I mean not negatively, I mean like the absence of like immigrants or LGBTQ people, but like a positive connotation with a real time in history, or is he just feeding off lunatic fantasy? That's my
I'll go in order. I think the question about people voting against their interests or letting things happen against their interests is interesting because how do we know what their interests are? So the question is, people, every person defines their interests through their own way of viewing the world. So we could say, well, poor people have certain interests, but maybe that person identifies not as a middle class person. In the United States, that's very, very common that people in the working class or people who are poor objectively identify as middle class. So there's that question, or they don't consider class to be a defining element in their interests. They consider that race or gender or sexuality is more important. So I think that that speaks to your question about the nuances of the left. And I think one of the difficulties, one of the challenges we have is that we do have a very developed discourses on these questions, but how do we make them understandable to the public, and I think that's, you know, something that we have to work on constantly, without oversimplifying, because also oversimplification can bring its own problems, and even for Trumpism and MAGAs, oversimplification, it brings complications. So I think there's definitely a tension there. I don't have an answer to how to manage it, but I think if we're attentive to it, that's already a step in the right direction. Considering the role of censorship, I think that's a great point, and I didn't put it on there. Obviously, the repressive functions of the state are becoming increasingly strong. We've seen it just recently with Trump deporting or disappearing people who supported the solidarity with Palestine movement. So that's going to be a real question, I think, that the left is going to have to take up in the next weeks and months. And it'll depend on how many people come out in support of, you know, the different campaigns that will happen, and also how far other people will allow Trump to go without, you know, saying, oh, this is enough. And just the fact that Musk, for example, owns Twitter, I mean, he can do whatever he wants. So, unfortunately, so, and other social media platforms. So maybe also a question would be about socializing social media, the ownership. But that's probably another debate to be had. And on the last question about what is Trump referring to, I do think he's referring to like the 50s, the 40s. Yeah, he's thinking about, you know, 1880 to 1950, essentially. When there was segregation, when there was discrimination, when women didn't work that much, they were more in the household. When LGBT people weren't openly in public. When Christianity was, even though he's not personally a very Christian person, when Christianity, Protestant morals, etc., were, you know, were the norm. I think he's referring to that time, and also the conception of the state, a weaker state in social provision and a much more repressive state towards workers and other segments of society. And I think Trumpism, and that's what I tried to get at in the talk, it's really a reaction also to these advances that typically exploited and oppressed groups in the United States made in the past 50 years, with civil rights, with more democracy, etc. So I think he does have a reference, and it's that kind of that time period, the beginning of the 20th century.
Just maybe you mentioned it, but I have like a feeling that in the left, like the Democrats, or you told about the left working, yeah.
Yep.
The revolutionary social workers, and also into the Democrats, there are different response to the Trumpist movement, I will say it like that. So I see also a little bit like a fragmentation of the leftists into Democrats, but also left voices outside the Democrats, and it refers to me like a little bit like in Europe, like, okay, the left is also like fragmented, like if we look now in the European level, we have like the European left, and we have also the European Left Alliance. So my question is, like, if we have on one side like the Republican who seems to speak in one voice, and then you have the leftists who are speaking through different voices and always refer that the left are not combined in the struggle. So yeah. Again, so what is not the solution, but do we have as leftists like a problem of reunited when it comes to a bigger issue? Or where is the issue into the left that we don't combine the forces when it comes to social crisis like Trumpism.
Hi. Yeah, so my question is also, you kind of already mentioned the whole conspiracy theory aspect of Trumpism and, lesbian politicians. But one thing that I've personally noticed compared to his first term is the kind of lack of these fringe groups like QAnon. And my question is like, I guess the way I see it is they've fully been embraced by the MAGA movement. And you also mentioned Gransky before. In what way does this kind of shift in common sense towards these really conspiratorial kind of views affects Trumpism when it's current term? And how can we as a left party counteract these, well, frankly, insane opinions that people have and kind of like state as fact? Because obviously Elon Musk's, I guess, a big conspiracy guy now, which is scary in a way. And so how is like the left, can we counteract these insane views and kind of teach people or show people that, like, it's wrong?
Okay.
Genau. Lass den her.
Yes, I want to come back to an event that happened a few months ago, because you were talking about how important it would be for the left to take into account the emotional aspect and the effects in political discourse. And my question concerns the shooting of the CEO of, I don't know, the...
United Healthcare?
Exactly,
Yep.
that guy, where there was this very weird discourse, public discourse around it, where this guy is now being celebrated as some kind of a martyr, and this is something that's very American, this kind of Lone Ranger, Second Amendment, taking up the arms against something that he finds unjust. And you have people, if I'm not mistaken, but maybe you are more informed about that, you have people on the right that basically do not disagree with this act. And so my question is, when we talk about emotions and so on, what is, in a country that is so violent as the United States, what, my question is, do you think, do you think that this discourse around it, was it more of a joke? Or is this something that we should take seriously in it? Like, how should we as Europeans understand the discourse around this act of it? And should it be taken seriously in some kind of a political analysis to understand Americans and their kind of celebration of violence in the political discourse?
Okay, thank you.
We have just 10 minutes left, so
Okay.
Afterwards
quick.
2 other people will
Okay,
ask a question
okay.
and
I'll
then
try to
it's-
go quick. So to talk about the question about fragmentation, I think fragmentation on the left is a huge problem. And I think it obviously has historical roots in the way that the left developed. And especially organizationally, where each organization kind of defends its program, its strategy, wants to gain the most members, et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of times the detriment of the overall project, political project of, liberating society from oppression and exploitation. I don't have an answer to it, but I do think that a starting point is to kind of put away the old debates and not necessarily the historical lessons that we can take from the movement, but put aside the old debates and start talking about what's happening in the here and now and how we can go forward together. I personally still know people who debate what is the nature of the Soviet Union. Was it a degenerative workers' state or other things like? I think okay, for historical purposes it's interesting, but for politics today, there's not a big need to have splits over that question, I think. So my personal suggestion, and it's what I try to do in my activism, is just kind of be open to discussing with people of different perspectives and try to see if we can can articulate some sort of common, common project together. Because I don't think we need to share all the same opinions, or the same strategy or the same tactics. But I think through discussion we can, through experimenting, we can kind of battle those tendencies towards fragmentation. That would be my personal opinion. On the question of conspiracy theories and people taking them as fact when they're totally wild, I would say what that points out to us is that the left has a problem with rationality. I think the left, in a lot of cases, remains a very rationalist project. And I would suggest that we need to accept that rationality doesn't have to be the center of our politics, and that when people say crazy things, yes, there's scientific evidence for vaccines, for example, things like that. But we're not, if we talk to people who are criticizing vaccines with crazy theories, but we're coming to them with scientific data, we're not meeting them at the same level. So I think there's something else to be done. I don't know what that is, but all I know is that we're not going to get there just by saying, well, there's scientific evidence. Because people say that every day and it doesn't work. So once again, no answer to the question, but I think thinking about the rationality and the place of rationality in the left project is important. And the third question came from, sorry. Yeah, the shooting. The shooting. Actually, it wasn't a joke. And there's actually lots of people on the left, and even lots of people who aren't politically engaged who supported what he did. He said the CEO deserved it, because United Healthcare is known for essentially putting people to death through declining life-saving care, cancer treatments, surgeries, etc. So even people I know who are very centrist, say, the CEO deserved it. And now today they're against, for example, Luigi Mignoni getting the death penalty. They're outraged by the fact that he could be punished. Maybe they think, yeah, he should be punished a little, but it wasn't a joke. It was a legitimate sentiment that was being expressed of a frustration with a healthcare system that's totally broken, and essentially puts people to death if you can't pay. So yeah, it wasn't a joke. And on the left, people were, yeah.
Merci. Je me permets d'adresser la parole en français. Je crois que tu n'as pas de problème avec ça. Bon, en fait, ma question, c'est, je crois que la politique économique et douanière de Trump va avoir un impact aussi assez négatif sur certains secteurs de l'industrie américaine. Et quelle est l'attitude des syndicats envers ça, hein? Bon, je crois c'est une évidence qu'on ne va pas avoir maintenant, avec tout ce qui passe sur les bourses internationales et tout ça, la guerre commerciale, une énorme conjoncture qui va s'envoler. Mais quelle va être la réaction de la classe ouvrière et des syndicats sur les effets de la politique de Trump? Merci.
Ah, ok.
Non. Ok, c'est bon.
Très good.
Ok. Est-ce que je réponds en français? Oui, ok. Moi, je peux parler du mouvement syndical, mais pas de la classe ouvrière, parce que, voilà, je ne sais pas même si la classe ouvrière existe en tant que sujet politique aux États-Unis, mais en tant que mouvement syndicaliste, c'est sûr qu'il y a des divisions. Il y a des syndicats qui sont dans une stratégie de concession vis-à-vis de Trump, donc ils acceptent certaines mesures qu'ils mettent en place, y compris avec un soutien pour les tarifs, par exemple. Ça, c'est des secteurs plus conservateurs. Après, il y a des secteurs plus radicaux plus entre guillemets lutte de classe, c'est comme ça qu'il s'appelle, qui veulent monter une véritable offensive contre les mesures économiques de Trump. Et ils font, souvent c'est des gens qui ont été dans la lutte pour augmenter le salaire minimum, etc. Beaucoup de jeunes dans des emplois précaires. Donc il y a quand même des divisions dans le mouvement syndical et je pense que ça va certainement jouer dans les mois à venir. Mais voilà, pour résumer, il y a une aile plus autour de la bureaucratie syndicale qui est très conservatrice, qui est prête à faire des concessions, et puis une base un peu plus frustrée, militante, etc., qui est prête à se battre. Donc voilà.
Voilà, merci beaucoup. Alors, Sean.
Merci.